Hello, guys. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Glad to see everyone.
Well, I don't know if you got to hear my joke. Should I repeat it, my Russian joke?
Oh, that's intriguing.
Okay, well, and this is actually from our audience member, Agnieszka. It goes like this. A Russian goes to a pharmacy and asks for as many antidepressants as possible. The pharmacist, of course, asks, do you have a prescription? And the Russian replies, what? Isn't a Russian passport enough? So, um, and she sent me another Russian joke as well. I take it actually, I mean, in all seriousness, if Russians are telling themselves these kinds of jokes, I take this as a positive sign.
Oh, Russians always tell each other jokes about us Russians and about all others. We have so many of them. That's the usual way how our people react to problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you, in Ukraine, it's now tenfold. A lot of jokes.
Jokes about Russians.
Even about Ukrainians, yes, but
Yeah.
about Russians for sure.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to talk about the perception of Russians about themselves, what's going on there, and something you posted on Telegram. But before we go there, let's do the obvious thing and get an update from you on what's happening with the Congress and what you see is coming next.
Not so much to tell because there were holidays and most of parliaments and governments, they were on vacations. And that includes Ukrainian government and Polish government, which are currently kind of our hottest contacts with whom we are cooperating the most. But we are planning to restart activities next week. And we have several very high-level meetings in Poland planned and in Ukraine as well. So we think that before the end of January, we'll hear some news. And also we have just started preparation of the new Congress, the second one, which is to take place in February. And we mainly spend this time end of the year to work on the legislation. And our official deadline for submitting amendments to the submitted laws would be 10th of January. But two very important laws, draft of the Constitution and draft of freedom of speech, mass media law, they were already submitted, and by the end of January there will be a face-to-face meeting of the working groups which are working on these particular pieces of legislation so that they could be voted on during the Congress.
You know, it's interesting. I'm obviously in the US. We have a lot of people here from Canada. We have people from England here and from other parts of Western Europe. And so one of the things that has interested me about your work on the Congress and in our conversations here is how highly ranked the subject of free speech becomes. Like you just mentioned, the Congress and free speech. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're in the West, you either forget or perhaps don't really understand how important that is and what it's like to live somewhere where there is not free speech. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah. There are probably two things to say here separately. One story, indeed, what you just said, to live with free speech or without free speech, and how this free speech is being protected by the legislation. But in the West, I mean, not in the West in general, but in the Anglo-Saxon West, in UK and in US, where there is precedent law, a lot of being judged by the common sense. And you can tell whether the guy is influencing the freedom of speech or whether he is not. So whether the government is messing with the media or it's not. In the countries where there is continental legislation, continental law. You have to write very thoroughly all the mechanisms to protect freedom of speech. And even minor loopholes can grow into a significant problem. And in Russia, ironically, the law on freedom of speech, so the main fundamental law which regulates media, was one of the most well-written laws during the whole period of reforms after perestroika. And I myself in State Duma, half of my term, I was in the committee for information policies, and that included internet, telecommunications, and mass media. And I personally was guarding this law from any malicious amendments, which were numerous, because obviously all the deputies, they always thought that they understand everything about mass media. They could like pretend, okay, like technical standards or I don't know innovation. So that's we don't know much about. But mass media, everybody believed that they know everything about.
Yes.
And that's why a lot of people were submitting all the time a lot of stupid amendments, but which were at the same time very populist and could have easily passed the voting if they would have been introduced to the floor during the plenary sessions. So to protect this legislation was pretty hard. Anyway, what we needed to do now is we took that old law, which was quite well written, but still to nail down all the loopholes and make it protected through on the constitutional level, that it would be very hard to make these bad amendments which would restrict the freedom of speech. Also, the thing which we are trying to do very innovatively, and I never heard about any example like this in any other country in the world, is that we want to basically make all the mass media in the country following the model how, say, PBS in United States or BBC in Great Britain was created. So the model of the public financing. What we're basically trying to do is we're trying to create a publicly sponsored foundation, which has been financed through a special tax, the Foundation of Freedom of Speech, where all the media that exist in the country can draw money from, based on how many viewers they have or how many readers they have. So automatically, that it's not regulated by any commission or whatever, just automatically, you know, the more viewers, the more popular you are, the more money you get, and that this money would be sufficient for the media to exist, and that would provide them independence from different oligarchs or from the state. Obviously, they can do paid services, paid subscriptions, whatever, no problem. But still, they have a certain guaranteed minimum, which would guarantee their independence from the money bags. And that's the fundamental innovation that we are trying to bring.
I'm going to have to think about that as a member of the media myself. Maybe that's for another conversation, because it's a very interesting idea. What I want to ask you now is,
if we have, for example, YouTube, that's exactly how the thing works.
Yes.
You being on the platform, after a certain threshold, you are above the threshold, you start getting money proportionally to the number of viewers you have. And that does not depend on what you are speaking about. So there is nobody who is deciding whether to give you money or not. It's an automatic procedure. And that's exactly the mechanism that we are trying to use, but to all of the media, printed media, television stations, radio, whatever. So that's not restrictive. You can always create something more.
Right.
And they raise more money and sell advertisement and whatever. But still, if you do nothing, you still can exist with this amount of financing that has been brought by the state.
Huh. So you're institutionalizing a market model that's already proven to work.
Yes.
Yeah. So you said about the freedom of speech laws in Russia that during the reforms they were well written, and that there was a lot of work, including on your part as a member of the State Duma, to protect those rights of the citizens. So I guess my question as an outsider is, how the hell did Russia end up where it is today? Were the laws changed, or are the laws just being ignored?
No, actually, the fundamental problem is that Russian Federation was created by a bunch of new liberal dogmatics. And they felt like free market would put everything in place. And it was the same approach to mass media. What was very well written in the law that there is a boundary between the editorial board and the owner. But still the owner controls the media through the financial infusion.
Yes.
And what was the idea of the creators of the law from the very beginning is that because there is a competition between those financial scumbags, that they can never get in accord with each other, and that's why it would be a pluralism of speech and there would be a diversity of opinions on the market. And for example, if we look at what we have in Ukraine, because in Ukraine the state is weak, oligarchs are strong, they are competing and fighting with each other. That's why there is a whole spectrum of different media, because every different media is being sponsored by a different oligarch, which are never gets in agreement with each other, and kind of everything is fine. But in Russia, the state started to control the oligarchs. And after that, it didn't need to control the media. They controlled the financial bags. And the rest fell in place automatically. When something was said wrongly by certain media, the debates were happening not between the state and the media. The debates were happening between the state and the controlling oligarch. And because for oligarchs, these media were basically, tools of political influence from the very beginning. So firstly, they started to guide those media in their own political agenda. And after these even political agendas were eliminated by Putin, like nobody could interfere with his own agenda. But then it was a kind of a social obligation. All the oligarchs that were receiving a lot of state funding and whatever, they were obliged to finance the media. So in formality, we have a whole panel of different independent media competing, which are being controlled by different oligarchs.
Competing.
Competing.
Yeah.
And some of them are even sustainable businesses. Those who are not in the politics.
Yes.
But all the oligarchs, they represent one corporation. That's why their competition is the competition between two different political programs which are speaking exactly the same language. And that's why there is no freedom of speech whatsoever in the country. And that's exactly why we try to target this financial independence. And because to our opinion, that's the key thing to achieve the independence of the media, is to give them financial independence. And secondly, where we have a lot of debates on the media side, is what to do with this existing media. Because with the state media, it's kind of the simplest thing. They're already state, so we can just remove their management. put them to jail because they supported the war and justified the atrocities. Some of them could be just restricted whatsoever, So clean them up. They will be nice. You can even privatize them after that, so to foster the competition, whatever. But the overwhelming majority of Russian media, which are the most notorious, Putin propaganda tools, they formally are private.
Yes.
The first channel of Russian TV, NTV, I can name a lot of others, the main national newspapers, the main national radio channels, all of them, they private, but they controlled by somebody next to Putin. So we have to do very painful process of nationalizing them, because there is no way how you can change the management, because they're private.
Yes.
So you have to nationalize them first, but then privatize them, and do it quite quickly, because we don't want to create a state monopoly on the media the other way around. And we even put in this card in stone that the state should not control more than one media in the country.
So we do a show on BeamZ on Wednesdays called Tyranny Today. And yesterday we had a conversation about how the Russian invasion has changed the country of Ukraine and really the spirit of the Ukrainian people. And you even talk about this in your book. But it made me think, and this is really relative to a conversation about media as well, do you think that this invasion by Russia has changed the Russian people? Or are they just digging in and kind of isolating? I think there's a term called individual isolation or something like that. Are they just kind of hunkering down and hoping it'll go away and repelling any change because they don't want to know what's going on that their country is responsible for?
For Ukrainians, the change is fundamental, and it's qualitative change. For Russians, the change is very incremental and quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
Because these changes that are happening in Russia, they were happening during a very long period of time, and it's a very gradual process of tightening the screws and brainwashing people and justifying the unjustifiable and pushing them in a certain direction.
Yes.
So if we compare Russians of today with the Russians of say 10 years ago, you would see a dramatic change. I would see probably a larger change that happened in the Ukrainian society. But in the Ukrainian society, it was happening in jumps, and in Russia, it was very, very, very gradual process.
But changing for the Russian, I'm not sure if you're suggesting they changed in a way that's better for them as individuals, or to create more, as Agnieszka helps me with the right terminology. Did they change by becoming increasingly isolated, or more and more of what is called internal immigration? Because I'm imagining. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say that Agnieszka's story is absolutely right. Absolutely right. I think that it's actually interesting how these things change, because in general, this feeling of internal immigration is very typical for the Soviet society. It's another side of alienation of an individual from the state and from the society, because the society in general has been seen by an individual as an oppressive entity, and that's why the individual learns to distrust everyone, to be one person on public and another person in his private life. But during the annexation of Crimea, that triggered a certain wave of national pride and the restoration of a certain injustice among Russians, because most of Russians felt that it was not fair that Crimea stayed with Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because they felt like it wound up being in Ukraine by accident, by logistics reasons. And that nobody envisioned that we will become two separate countries. And if now we are two separate countries, let's discuss this issue and revisit the transferal of Crimea into Ukraine. But okay, what happened in 2014. Yes, it was an outburst of joy, but then, when the joy ended and nothing else changed in the country, that was triggering a lot of hopes, and many people started to say that maybe we are coming back to the best days of the Soviet Union, when the government did care about people and it would be more social justice and whatever, but nothing happened. It was even worse, and then the sanctions and the downfall in the economy, and in general, there's no progress in the society. So it's like people started to get tired, and then the pension reform hit. Which many people felt like they were betrayed by Putin, because he directly promised that nothing like this would never happen, but it happened. And then this war, people are saying, okay, so we have no influence, we have no say. It's not our war. And that's basically the state of the society in the moment.
So you wrote on Telegram yesterday, I think, there is already a split in the elites in Russia, but they will only begin to stir in the end game when everything starts to collapse. When the people rise up, there will be a revolt from below and a bayonet in the ass. Our legion will become this bayonet. We must be in Moscow at the right time and take control of the situation. And of course, at this moment, dissatisfied Muscovites will join us, who will understand that they are no longer one-on-one with the riot police. Did you say this yesterday because, from your perspective, this is getting close to becoming a reality?
Yes, I think it's getting closer and closer. And obviously, it all very much depends on the situation in Ukraine at the field of war. That's the key factor for the changes in Russia. But yeah, the main problem is exactly what we just discussed, is this alienation. And right now it's safer for whatever individual, whether it's a representative of the elites or whether it's is a representative of the very bottom of the society, it's safer to sit in this shell and pretend like nothing is going on around him. And what we need to do is we need to crush those cells. We need to explain to people that it's not safe at all, that it's actually threatening for their future, for their property, for their life, for their families, to sit in those shells. And that can happen at the moment of military defeat. And that's why I was saying that I think that the actual reaction, uprising, both of the elites and of the ordinary people, will happen when it would be very close to the end already.
Of course, well, I'm not going to say of course. I'm going to ask it as a question. How the elites uprise is going to be very different from how your typical Russian citizens uprise. Are you thinking that the elites will take to the street, or their uprising will happen more in back rooms and in bank accounts and things like that?
No, we need the uprising to remove Putin.
Mm-hmm.
We need shuffles at the top. We need destabilization of the political system. We need that those rats would try to escape, that they would try to find their way out. And there is no way out with this heritage of Putin's regime. So they need to drop it. And that's the process that we need to start happening. And for the ordinary people, yeah, obviously it's coming to the streets, but it's linked processes. You know, people at the top would start doing things when they would be threatened by the people on the streets, and people on the streets would be coming to the streets when they see that the oppression is not that dangerous, because those at the top are in a disarray.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last thing before I let you go, because this never occurred to me before until today. But, you know, there's appeasers who say, you know, Ukraine should just give you Crimea back to Russia, and then Putin will go away. And of course, wise people understand that if you give someone like Putin something, he just wants more, right? It's a bully syndrome. It's a mafia syndrome. And I never realized until today that also applies on an individual level in Russia, that the Russian people have been giving Putin things, whether they realized it or not. And so as a bully, he just wants more and more and more. So the individual Russian is very much analogous to the Ukrainian nation, in that if they don't hold on to what they got and fight for it, they're just going to lose more and more. Is that a fair statement?
It is very much a fair statement. And it's actually, as you said, something occurred to you today. I would say something else occurred to me also today when I was on my TV channel talking to one of my guests. And the guy said that Putin, before, he was fed with different privileges and then money. Right now, he started to be fed with human blood, literally. Because he understands that to sustain the current situation at the field of war, every day between 500 to 1,000 Russians perish. So he says, okay, well, the toll is 15 to 30,000 a month. Russians, I can afford it. That's the price for me staying at power. I can afford it. And that's exactly what's happening right now.
So he's a vampire.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, on that happy note, I'm going to let you go. I hope we'll see you next week. I'm going to cut you off here and let you get on to your next thing. I've got a couple of things I'm going to say. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, guys. And again, Happy New Year.